In almost every game that entails a roster of playable characters, the developers tend to section them off into categories based on a recurring pattern of gameplay. Or if they don't, then the players take it upon themselves to do so. This kind of system is implemented to make it easier for players to recognize unfamiliar characters by comparing shared traits, and it's those traits that lay down the foundation for designing new releases in the future. But first, I'd like to say thank you to Lootboy for sponsoring the video. Lootboy is an app available on iOS, Android, and PC that lets you earn free Riot points through premium loot packs. Premium packs offer a lot of different goodies for different games on mobile, PC, Google Play, and more. They can help you get your hands on free in-game or premium currency, and to celebrate Worlds 2022 this year, you can purchase Summoner's Rift premium packs using diamonds for a chance to win Riot point gift cards ranging from $2.50 to up to $100. Diamonds can be earned for free over time or purchased with real money. The gift cards work just like any other, copy-paste the code and you're good to go. One other thing, every time you purchase 10 packs, you get a special black market bonus loot pack that contains a cheat chip which grants you black market credits. Those credits can be used to redeem gift cards ranging from Google Play to Nintendo eShop to Amazon, Steam, Xbox Live, what have you. Lootboy is a fun way to have a chance at earning free Riot points for those of you who want to get your hands on skins but don't feel like buying them, so if you want a shot at it, check out the link on screen which is also in the description and you'll be awarded a special community loot pack with diamonds, coins, and many more. Thanks again to Lootboy for sponsoring the video, but for now, let's get back into it. The 160-something champions currently in the game are divided into 7 main groups, with the exception of Marksman and Specialist. The remaining 5 are separated into additional subclasses. For the most part, they sort out the cast rather nicely. There's a distinction between how a Juggernaut and Diver plays, for example, even though they equally represent the notion of close quarters melee combat. In spite of the decent coverage, some champions have a different playstyle that could serve as its own designation. A good number of videos on this channel feature champions that possess a certain mechanic or playstyle that isn't formally recognized by the game, but everyone assigns those names to them, such as hypercarries, infinite scalers, summoners, caster marksmen, and so on. In today's video, I want to go through League's forgotten classes, champions who are part of a certain archetype that haven't been explored beyond maybe 1 or 2 members. This topic was actually suggested by a viewer who wanted me to discuss why they either failed or were too impractical or niche to be expanded upon, and I thought that would make for an interesting discussion, as in many champion group episodes I like to elaborate on why they're not easy to make. To name a few, I made an episode on why hybrid champions are hard to balance, why melee crit users pose a design challenge when finding that middle ground between them and ranged crit users, so on and so forth. As I said before, the game's 13 subclasses do a somewhat competent job sorting out all 160-something champions, but over the years, especially with new additions blurring the lines between what is an assassin or what is a fighter, whether intentionally or not, it feels like it's getting more difficult to recognize what class a champion really is. For example, assassins are characterized by their staggering front-loaded damage, great mobility, and clever escape tools using mechanics like stealth. In exchange, they lose a great deal of pressure when facing tanks, lockdown crowd control, or champions who specialize in defensive support, as all of them pose a threat to an assassin's greatest weapon, momentum. Those constraints were put in place when designing champions like Zed, Katarina, and Kha'Zix, but when you start factoring the likes of Akali, Yone, or Diana, they appear to perform just as effectively in less than favorable situations compared to what is expected from an assassin. I think this is most evident in Marksman since they feature no subclasses. So you have Samira and Neela who dive headfirst into the enemy team, sharing a platform with Kai'Sa and Vayne, who specialize in divide and conquer, sharing a platform with Jinx and Twitch, who are standard team fighting marksmen. Trying to compartmentalize every single champion based on the smallest nuances in their gameplay will only lead to splitting hairs. They're unique in their own ways, even if it feels like we're going down the path of every new release being a high mobility hypercarry. That being said, I want to go through a handful of what I consider forgotten classes that I think could really spice up the game if they were fine-tuned a bit. The first one will be the Paladin class, which by all accounts has been erased from existence following Tyrik's rework. Ordinarily, Paladins are a subclass of warriors that you see in most RPGs, whose code of honor and motivations are heavily influenced by theocracy of some kind. Holy Knights, they're usually virtuous or have some inclination to light. In-game, Paladins usually specialize in a combination of offense and defense in accordance to their parent class, but instead of prioritizing brute force, they have more supportive elements in their kit, sometimes a trace of magic. Tyrik's whole design was very reminiscent of this. I would say he behaves very closely to a Juggernaut and tank. His Q would heal himself and a nearby target ally, or just himself for more. His W was an aura that granted bonus armor to himself and nearby friendlies, and on cast he would deal a burst of damage to nearby enemies and reduce their armor. His E was a point-and-click stun that dealt more damage the closer the enemy was to him, and lastly his ultimate was a burst of magic damage in an area just like his W. For 10 seconds he would gain bonus attack damage and ability power, and half of that would be shared with friendlies as well. Tarik was perfectly able to handle his own in single combat, as you could play him in top lane and would be a very difficult bruiser to take down, especially if he was able to heal faster than the damage you could dish out to him. But thanks to Shatter, Imbue, and Radiance, he could support his team, giving him a hybrid playstyle. Paladins are also like this in other games. Their damage may not be as strong as classes who are fully committed to DPS, but they make up for that in flexibility, helping out their team or contributing some damage whenever necessary. One would think this kind of flexibility presents a lot of interesting ideas for champions. League is a team game after all, and some players are naturally more comfortable with these kinds of abilities. I'm sure the few who did play old Taric really missed that, as new Taric is exclusively a support unless your name is Light Rocket, so why aren't there any other paladins in the game? At least to me, paladins are the living embodiment of a jack-of-all-trades class, and with that comes the risk of being master of none or master of all. To create a viable paladin, especially in this game, they have to be independent enough to survive the solo aspect of the game, being laning phase, but they also require sufficient enough supportive faculty to justify being deployed over someone who carries a bigger stick. What is the only reason you would use old Taric over someone like Darius and Mordekaiser who did way more damage? The answer is the supportive part, the healing, the armor, the bonus AD and AP, and would then become a game of numbers. Hypothetically, if Darius and Mordekaiser were 100% solo and 0% support, for Taric, and by extension any other theoretical paladin to be more desirable, the sum of the solo and support values would have to be greater than 100%. Otherwise, there's absolutely no pragmatic incentive to use them. Solo queue fosters the notion that it's every man for himself. Paladins are far more useful when operated in sync with a cohesive team. There's no guarantee the other 4 randoms on your team will understand how to take full advantage of your attack and support kits, so all you're doing is taking an unnecessary risk by choosing a paladin. As such, Taric would need a very big safety margin. He would need at least 75% solo and 75% support. But you can see how being 1.5 times stronger than Darius or Mordekaiser can pose an issue of balance. Supportive abilities are really strong in this game because of all the different items that complement it. A single champion who could potentially abuse that will cause too many problems, let alone an entire class, and I think that was the main motivation behind reworking Taric as the support, even though he's been struggling to settle into his role for quite a while now. The second class I want to talk about would be the Summoner. I made a dedicated video on them which I suggest you check out if you haven't yet, but I like to revisit them since I think they're another forgotten class with so many possibilities, yet they sort of just evolved into being nothing more than glorified minions. Summoners, as the name implies, are characters who can instantiate units or pets that fight alongside you and are another frequent sight in RPGs, especially MMOs. Unlike Paladins, which only feature Taric, there's actually a good number of Summoner type champions still in the game, so it's less about the class not existing and more about the mechanic being criminally underdeveloped. Let me explain. There are 4 champions whose ultimate summons a big minion: Iron and Daisy, Annie and Tibbers, Shaco, and lastly Yorick and Karen. Apparently that's what the player base calls her. Each have their own unique effects, but for all intents and purposes, they're merely giant minions. All the controller can do is move them around to target a specific unit. Summons in other games or forms of media take a much more active role. Several fighting games in particular feature at least one summoning mechanic, where either all of their pressure stems from whatever they're controlling or it's a mixture of both. In Super Smash Bros, the assist trophy item is a good example of this, where you spawn a character that helps you in battle through some predetermined set of attacks. Back in League, out of all summoners, Yorick is the only one who adopts that motif throughout his entire kit. About half of his pressure stems from himself, while the other half is dealt by his ghouls and Maiden. If you ask any Yorick player, they'll express how satisfying it is to overwhelm your opponents through sheer pack size, and from the occasional times I played Yorick myself, I can attest to that. But it feels equally frustrating when you run into how inconsistent Yorick is as a champion due to being reliant on so many factors going well at the same time. Setting up graves beforehand, trapping a target in your W cage and hoping they can't dash out of it, then landing your Morning Mist. Let's also not forget how awkward it is to control his various summons. More often than not, you'll find yourself disappointed by how useless they are rather than the other way around. Controlling summons beyond just movement is difficult because the game is structured to only have 4 actively pressable keys: Q, W, E, and R. If say you were planning on giving Karen her own set of abilities, how would that translate to controls? Would you have to use ASDF? But D and F are for summoner spells, flash on F by the way, and the S key is to stop all character actions. You'd have to remap an entire set of keys just to play one specific champion. Even though some cast members have more than one ability, they still manage to fit into the same QWER format. Aphelios is 5 Qs, but in the end it's still Q. Jace, Nidalee, and Elise have 2 Q, W, and Es, but it's still Q, W, and E. Designing summons to function autonomously is also extremely difficult. In RPGs, you're fighting an AI, and it's easy to program one algorithm to take on another. But League of Legends features far too many contingencies and what-if scenarios that make designing adaptable and comprehensive algorithms that change at a moment's notice far too advanced of an undertaking, hence why it feels like summons behave so stupidly and are treated as canon minions. Now there is a variation of the Summoner class, which are Puppet Masters, and there are a few of them in the game already. Champions who exert pressure through an external source that's directly tied to them. Azir and Orianna have their own summons in a manner of speaking, but instead of being separate entities with their own health bar, they're untargetable elements through which they use most if not all of their attacks. I suppose we can include Alawi too by extension, even though her tentacles are stationary. Not really sure if Syndra would count though. Unlike summoners, puppet masters are almost entirely useless on their own, since their entire kit is designed around piloting that external source. All of Orianna's moves either reposition her ball or cause an effect from that ball. Azir's moves reposition his soldiers or himself or create more soldiers. Optimal execution entails precise placement of their respective puppets at all times, which is why they're extremely difficult to play well. You have to be aware of both aspects at the same time. This is the only forgotten class where I can't figure out a proper reason that prevents more of those champions from being made other than being difficult to play. Orianna is one of the best designed champions in the game and has routinely seen great success in both solo queue and pro play. Azir's lifetime has been more turbulent, but in his defense, that's because he's so freaking good that in order to prevent him from dominating the meta, they have to hamstring his numbers to near unplayable levels. He still remains, conceptually, one of the most dynamic playmaking champions to this day. Perhaps what might be deterring them from making more puppet masters is the possible lack of variety in gameplay. Not saying Azir and Orianna are the same, but once again, the fact that we have only Q, W, E, and R for active abilities limits the amount of creative freedom. For starters, you need at least one ability that moves your puppets around. For both of them, it's Q. Then you need to figure out how to deal damage. Will it be through a spell, or through auto attacks, or something else? If it's a spell, it's probably going to be very reminiscent of Orianna. If it's through auto attacks, it's going to feel like Azir. Furthermore, all abilities have to pertain to your puppet. If you want to include a shield or crowd control, it has to be related to that thing in some way. Orianna's shield and ultimate is attached to her ball. There also needs to be some form of self-peel, seeing as if the puppet master is engaged on, they need to extricate themselves in that situation. Azir has E and ultimate. Designing attacks will also pose a challenge. You don't really want to give these types of champions a projectile or straight line skill shot, or else you get Zed, a melee champion quote-unquote whose shadows can throw shurikens no matter how far away he is. He basically has more range than artillery mages. Azir and Orianna are inherently kept in check by their short tether radius. There's a reason Azir has to be close to his soldiers to auto-attack. All in all, it might be another one of those classes where it's too annoying to jump through however many hoops, so they don't even bother with that. The final class I'm going to go over is the Constructor, and it's going to be fast because they share a lot of the same issues. Constructors would be Zyra, Heimerdinger, Gangplank, sort of a hybrid between Puppet Master and Summoner essentially. Constructors make separate entities that they interact with to do stuff. For Heimerdinger, he places down turrets, and using his grenade, he can prime those laser beams for big damage. Zyra plants seeds and uses her other abilities to spawn them. Gangplank sets a barrel and attacks it for an explosion. The two main concerns with this class take one problem from each of the previous ones. Constructors share the Summoner's dilemma of how much a champion's power budget should go into something they don't have full control over. Yes, you can guide Heimerdinger's turrets and Zyra's plans to target a certain individual, but aside from that, they're no different from summons. As for Gangplank, enemy champions can disarm them, leading to a heavy loss in uptime. Moreover, since you can move constructs after they're placed, how often should we allow the champion to build new ones? It has to be fast enough to where they're not irrelevant, but not too fast to where they don't get punished for carelessly placing them. As for the shared downside with Puppet Masters, there's not a whole lot of variety in regards to designing constructs. All they can really do is attack nearby targets. Gangplank's interaction with barrels is certainly interesting, but he's the only one who will ever be able to do that. The other possibility I can think of is maybe setting traps that can be remotely detonated, but that's an entirely different class being trappers, and that goes back to the whole splitting hairs thing, where there's dozens of subclasses under subclasses. The bottom line for every forgotten class is that while they work in other games, League is not like other games. It's a 5v5 multiplayer online battle arena with a very strict framework of how things are done, so there's only so much room for deviation the champion design team has. I don't think it's necessarily impossible for any of these classes to resurface in the future, but every new champion over the past, I would say 6 years or so, places the focus on themselves and not some external source. The last one was, I believe, Aurelion Sol. Although, I do think a paladin champion is possible if they gave it some thought. Anyways, what do you guys think about forgotten classes? Do you think there are others that are more prominent than these four? Feel free to share in the comments down below. For now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be awesome if you love to like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and if you'd like to support me further, check out my Patreon page. By donating, you get access to benefits for all three of my channels, Vars, Vars 2, and Vars 3. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.